The night was quiet on the outer colony, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own heartbeat. Captain Ross sat inside his small wooden cabin, sharpening a knife while the old heater clicked in the corner. Outside, the air was cold enough to make your breath look like smoke. His dog, Max, lay curled by the door. Max was no ordinary pet. He was a war dog, trained to smell danger long before a human could see it. But tonight, Max seemed restless. His ears twitched. His nose sniffed. The air again and again, Ross noticed it. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Setting the knife down, Max gave a low growl, deep in his throat. Then he stood up, stiff as a statue, and stared at the door. The growl grew louder. His tail didn't wag. This wasn't excitement. This was warning. Before Ross could move, Max barked. One sharp, loud bark that echoed in the cabin. Then another. Then he lunged at the door. Ross grabbed his jacket and his rifle. "All right, I'm coming," he muttered. Max was already scratching at the door, eager to get out. The moment Ross opened it, Max shot into the dark like a bullet. The beam from the cabin's light only reached a few steps outside, and beyond that was the black wall of the forest. Ross followed, boots crunching on frozen dirt. His breath puffed out in small clouds as he moved. The only sound was Max's paws hitting the ground ahead in the sharp, urgent barks that seemed to pull Ross deeper into the trees. "Max, slow down." Ross hissed, but the dog didn't listen. 100 meters in, Max stopped. His body was low, his head forward, ears standing tall. Ross slowed, lifting the rifle to his shoulder, eyes scanning the shadows. Then he saw it, at first. It looked like a pile of rags thrown on the ground. But as Ross stepped closer, the shape moved. A weak sound, half a groan, half a breath escaped from it. Ross's eyes adjusted to the dim light. His chest tightened. It wasn't a pile of rags. It was a person. No, not a person. An alien. The sight hit him like a punch. The armor was battered, but still recognizable black plates with sharp silver edges, marked with the symbol of the Kovari Empire, the enemy. The same species that had destroyed colonies, burned cities, and killed human soldiers by the thousands. She was lying on her side, her arm twisted under her. Blood, dark and thick, pooled beneath her body, soaking into the dirt. Her skin was a pale blue with faint glowing lines running along her neck and jaw. Her eyes were half open, but unfocused. Ross froze. His orders were clear. If you see the enemy, you call it in. No exceptions. Max, however, didn't care about orders. He stepped forward, sniffed the alien's hand, and whimpered. Then he did something that made Ross blink. Max licked her fingers. "Max, no," Ross whispered sharply, glancing around. If anyone saw this, they'd think he'd lost his mind. The alien's lips moved. The sound that came out was broken, weak words, in a language Ross didn't understand. Her voice cracked, each syllable barely hanging on. Ross's finger hovered near the radio on his chest. One press, and soldiers from the nearby outpost would be here in minutes. They'd take her away, probably finish her off. But Max looked back at him with those bright brown eyes, as if saying, "She's not a threat right now. She's just hurt." Ross tightened his grip on the rifle. He had every reason to walk away, every reason to obey the rules. And yet, something about the way she looked at him wasn't the glare of an enemy soldier. It was the pleading look of someone who didn't want to die alone in the dirt. He crouched down, keeping the rifle pointed away but ready. "You understand me?" he asked. She blinked slowly. Her breathing was shallow. One of her hands moved slightly toward her chest, as if protecting something under her armor. Max whined again, stepping closer to her head. The alien's eyes followed him, and for a second, a faint expression crossed her face. It wasn't fear. was almost relief. Ross's mind raced. If he helped her, he would be breaking the law. If anyone found out, it would be his career, maybe his life. But if he left her here, she'd be dead within the hour. Another sound broke the nighted distant hum. Ross froze. That was the sound of a patrol ship. It was coming closer. He had seconds to decide. Max barked once, sharply, as if pushing him toward the choice he didn't want to make. Ross slung the rifle over his shoulder, bent down, and slid his arms under the alien's body. She was lighter than he expected, but still limp in his grip. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel her shallow breaths. The hum of the patrol grew louder. Ross turned and started moving back toward the cabin. Fast, but silent. Max? Running ahead to clear the path. Behind him, the forest swallowed the spot where he had found her. Ahead, the cabin's light was a small, warm glow in the cold darkness. He didn't know why he was doing this. He only knew one thing: whatever happened next, nothing would be the same again. Ross kicked the cabin door shut behind him, careful not to bang it too hard. The patrol ship's hum faded into the distance. He set the alien down gently on the old couch, its fabric already stained from years of dust and use. Max stood close, tail wagging but movement slow, as if he understood the alien was fragile. His nose kept sniffing her, then pulling back at the faint metallic scent of her blood. Ross crouched beside her. Up close, she looked even more different than the war posters made her kind appear. Her face wasn't twisted with anger. There was no fire in her eyes, just exhaustion and something deeper. Fear. Her armor was cracked along one side. The glowing lines in her skin were dim, pulsing weakly like a dying light bulb. He reached to check her wound, but paused when she flinched away. "It's all right," he said, his voice low. "I'm not going to hurt you." Yet, she looked at him, confused. Her lips moved, trying to form sounds. At first, it was all in her own tongue-sharp clicks and smooth flowing syllables. But then she forced out something in broken human speech. "No, soldier," she whispered, each word like a struggle. "I run." Ross frowned. "Run from who? Us?" She shook her head slowly, her hand trembling as she pointed upward as if toward the warships in the skies. Then she tapped her own armor, then made a cutting motion across her chest. "Deserter." Ross gasped, her eyes flickered. That was enough of an answer. He leaned back on his heels. A deserter. That complicated things. It meant she wasn't here to fight. But it also meant both sides might be after her own people for betrayal, and his people for simply being who she was. Max wind, stepping between them as if telling Ross to stop glaring. The dog sat down beside the alien, pressing his warm body lightly against her leg. She looked at Max for a long moment, her hand hesitating before she touched the top of his head. The faintest smile, almost invisible, touched her lips. Ross ran. A hand down his face. He had fought Kovari soldiers before. They were fast, deadly, and merciless. He had seen what they did to human prisoners. But looking at her now, struggling to breathe, barely able to speak, he didn't see a monster. He saw someone who had been left behind. "You need water," Ross muttered. He stood and filled a cup from the metal jug near the sink. When he offered it, she stared at it as if unsure. "It's just water," he said, taking a sip himself before offering it again. This time she took it, her fingers brushing his as she lifted it to her lips. She drank slowly, carefully, as though every swallow took strength. When she finished, she whispered, "Arya." Ross tilted his head. "That your name?" She nodded once, her eyes fluttering. "Well, Arya," Ross said, "I don't know why you ended up in my forest. You've made my night a lot more dangerous." Her lips curved slightly, as if she understood the joke. Max barked suddenly. The sound sharp, his ears pricked toward the window. Ross moved quickly to the curtain and peeked outside. A small scout drone floated in the distance, its red light scanning the tree line. Ross's pulse spiked. If that drone picked up heat signatures from his cabin, they'd have soldiers here in minutes. He turned to Arya. "You can't stay here out in the open." Her head lifted. "Hide?" she asked. The word clumsy, but clear enough. Yes, hide. He helped her stand, but she was weak, leaning heavily on him. He guided her to a trapdoor hidden under the rug. It led to a storage pit he had dug years ago, originally for storing supplies during heavy storms. Now it might save both their lives. As he helped her down, she grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak, but her eyes locked onto his. "No, tell," she whispered urgently. "I'm not going to," Ross promised. "But you have to stay quiet." She released him, sinking into the shadows of the storage pit. Max winced, clearly unhappy about leaving her there. Ross replaced the rug just as the faint hum of the drone grew louder. He moved to the table, grabbed a book, and sat down, pretending to read. The red light swept across the cabin window. Ross's heart thudded in his chest. Max sat by the door, his tail still, but his eyes locked on Ross, waiting for his signal. The drone hovered for a moment, then slowly drifted away. Ross let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. When he lifted the rug again, Arya was still there, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide in the dim light. "Clear," Ross said simply. She didn't move right away. But when she did, she looked at him as if trying to understand why a human soldier had just risked trouble for her. Ross didn't have an answer for her. He didn't even have one for himself. All he knew was that Max had chosen her, and maybe that was reason enough. The cabin was quiet again, but Ross could feel the change in the air. It wasn't peace, it was the silence before trouble came knocking. Max lay near the trapdoor, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes stayed open. He wasn't relaxing. He was guarding. Ross poured himself a cup of strong black coffee, but his hands were still shaking from the close call with the scout drone. He had been a soldier long enough to know what that meant. Someone, somewhere, was looking for Arya, and they weren't far. He glanced toward the floor where she was hidden. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to open the trapdoor, help her outside, and point her in any direction away from here. If she died out there, it would no longer be his problem. His record would stay clean, but the image of her pale, tired eyes wouldn't leave him. Ross had seen those eyes before on human civilians trapped in war zones. Too weak to fight, but still punished for being on the wrong side of a border. Max's tail thumped once, like he could read his thoughts. Ross sighed. "Yeah, I know. You like her." Finally, he pulled the rug back and opened the trapdoor. Arya looked up at him, blinking in the dim light. "It's clear," he said. Reaching down to help her out, she moved slowly, every motion stiff. When she stood, Ross noticed the wound under her armor again. It was worse than he thought. Dark. Almost black blood had soaked into the cloth beneath. He had treated human injuries in battle before, but alien biology was different. He wasn't even sure if human medicine would help her or make things worse. "Sit," Ross ordered, pulling over a chair. She obeyed without question, her legs too weak to resist anyway. Ross found his medkit and opened it on the table. "This might sting," he said, not knowing if she understood. He dabbed the wound with antiseptic. She flinched, but stayed still, her jaw tightening. When he wrapped the bandage around her side, her hand brushed his wrist. It wasn't by accident. She was looking right at him. "You help," she said slowly, her voice broken but sincere. Ross didn't reply. He focused on tightening the bandage. "You'll live," he said flatly. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. Why? He looked at her then, meeting her gaze. Because Max found you, he said simply. And I trust his judgment more than I trust my own. Barked once in agreement, making Arya almost smile. Ross moved back to the sink, rinsing his hands. But you can't stay here long. The patrols send ground units, they'll search every cabin. If they find you, he didn't finish the sentence. Arya's eyes dropped to the table. Her fingers tapped against the surface 3 slow taps, then 2 fast. She did it again, like a pattern. What is that? Ross asked. She hesitated, then reached into a small, hidden pocket in her damaged armor. When her hand came out, it held a thin metal disc, no bigger than a coin. Its surface shimmered faintly. This? Truth, she said. Ross frowned. Truth. She nodded and pressed it into his palm. The disc was warm. They lie. War. Not what they say. Before he could ask more, Max's head shot up, his ears pricked, and his low growl filled the room. Ross froze, listening. Then he heard a crunch of boots on snow outside. Not one person. Several. Arya's eyes widened. She tried to stand, but Ross held up a hand. Stay. He moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. Through the thin gap, he saw 3 human soldiers approaching the cabin. Their rifles were slung low, but their eyes were scanning everything. Ross's mind raced. He could hide Arya again, but if they decided to search inside, the trapdoor wouldn't save her. He grabbed her arm. You go under. You don't make a sound, he whispered. She nodded, moving quickly, despite the pain. He pulled the rug over, just as a knock rattled the door. Captain Ross, a voice called. Patrol sweep, just checking in. Ross opened the door, forcing a calm smile. Evening. The lead soldier glanced past him into the cabin. All quiet here. Just me and Max, Ross said. Max wagged his tail at the men, playing the part of harmless pet. The soldier stepped inside without asking. His boots thudded on the floorboards as he glanced around. You've seen anything unusual tonight? The scanners picked up heat signatures in this area. Ross shrugged. Probably wildlife. Saw some tracks earlier. The soldier's eyes narrowed slightly, but after a moment, he nodded. All right, stay alert. When they left, Ross didn't move for a full minute. He waited until their footsteps faded completely before pulling back the rug. Arya climbed out, her breathing shaky. She looked at him as if expecting him to be angry. But instead, he handed her the disc back. You'd better start explaining what you're running from, Ross said. She looked down at the disc, then up at him. Her next words were soft but heavy. Not running from you, running from them. Ross didn't know who them was yet, but he had just crossed a line. Helping her once could be called mercy. Keeping her here after a patrol visit. That was breaking the rules, and there was no turning back now. The wind howled outside the cabin, carrying with it the faint hum of distant engines. Ross sat at the table, the thin metal disc resting between his fingers. It looked harmless. Just a smooth coin of alien design, but the way Arya kept glancing at it told him it was far from ordinary. Max lay between them on the floor, his ears twitching every time a branch scraped against the window. The dog was tense, as if he knew something bigger was coming. Ross turned the disc over in his hand. What's on this? He asked. Arya's eyes followed the motion. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her gaze darted toward the walls, as if she feared they had ears. You? Not ready, she whispered. Ross frowned. Not ready? For what? Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and the quiet creak of the cabin settling. Finally, she spoke again, her voice halting. This war, not all real. Some battles. Made to happen. Ross stared at her. Made to happen? By who? She hesitated, then tapped her chest. Cover leaders. She tapped the table between them. Your leaders. Ross's jaw tightened. You're saying both sides are working together? Insane. Arya shook her head slowly. Not all, but some. They make fights, kill many, take land. Take resources, they call it. Peace after war. But war never end. Ross leaned back in his chair, the words hitting harder than he wanted to admit. He had always believed in the cause protecting humans from an alien empire that wanted to destroy them. But if she was telling the truth, then every friend he had lost might have died for nothing more than greed. He studied her face. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trying to convince him with charm or lies. She looked tired, broken, and honest. Max broke the heavy silence with a sharp bark, rushing to the door. His fur stood on end. Ross was up instantly, peering through the small crack in the curtain. In the distance, through the dark, faint lights moved between the trees' flashlights. More than one. Patrol, Ross muttered. He moved quickly to the trapdoor. You need to hide again. Arya gripped the edge of the table. No time, she said, pointing toward the back wall. Out. Ross followed her finger to the narrow back door that opened toward the frozen river. You can't go out there, he said. You'll freeze before you get a mile. She stepped toward him, determination in her eyes. Better cold. Then caught. Before he could argue, Max pawed at the back door. Whining urgently, Ross grabbed his heavy coat and slung it over Arya's shoulders. Stay low. Follow the riverbank west until you see a broken bridge. Hide under it. I'll find you after they leave. Arya's hands clutched the coat tight, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to say something. But instead, she nodded. Ross opened the back door just enough for her and Max to slip out. The cold night swallowed them instantly. The white of the snow reflecting the pale moonlight. Ross shut the door and turned back toward the front just as a loud knock shook it. Captain Ross. A familiar voice barked. It was Lieutenant Harker, one of the outpost's strictest officers. Open up. Ross forced a calm expression and swung the door wide. Lieutenant, what's going on? Harker stepped inside, 2 soldiers behind him. We're tracking an enemy deserter, female Kavari. Dangerous. Reports say she was seen moving through this sector. Have you seen anything? Ross shook his head. Just me and Max. No one else comes out here in this cold. Harker's gaze swept the room, lingering on the table where the medkit still lay open. Patch yourself up, he asked. Old injury. Ross replied smoothly. Just sore in this weather. One of the soldiers moved toward the back door. Ross's chest tightened. The soldier tested the handle, but Ross stepped forward casually. Back doors frozen shut from last storm. You'll waste your time. Harker studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Finally, he nodded. If you see her, you call it in immediately. Understand? Of course, Ross said. When they left, Ross closed the door and let out a slow breath. He waited a few minutes before grabbing his rifle and slipping out the back. The riverbank was nearly silent, except for the crunch of his boots on snow. He followed the frozen water west, the moonlight his only guide. After a while, he saw the shadow of the broken bridge. Underneath, pressed against the icy wall, was Arya. Max stood beside her, his breath steaming in the cold air. She looked up. As Ross approached, they come. Yeah, Ross said, glancing back toward the cabin. And they'll keep coming. He crouched beside her. If what you told me is true, then that disc could change everything. But we can't just walk into the capital with it. We need a way to get it into the right hands without getting killed. Arya nodded slowly. I know way, but dangerous. Ross gave a short, humorless laugh. Everything about this is dangerous. Max pressed against his leg, tail wagging once, as if reminding him they were in this together, for the first time. Ross realized the truth. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. This was about uncovering something that could shatter the lies he had been told his whole life, and he wasn't sure he could ever go back to who he was before tonight. The broken bridge gave little shelter from the cold. The wind cut through. The gaps like knives, and the ice beneath their feet groaned under their weight. Ross crouched beside Arya, scanning the tree line with sharp, trained eyes. Max stayed still, his head turning every time a branch cracked in the distance. "They'll be sweeping this area by morning," Ross said quietly. "We have to move before then." Arya hugged Ross's coat tighter around her thin frame. "Where?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "There's an old pump station 2 hours from here," Ross replied. "It's abandoned, but if the power cells still work, we can send your data to someone I trust." She tilted her head. "Trust? Human?" Ross gave a short nod. "Old friend." "Doesn't answer to the generals anymore." Max's ears twitched. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ross turned his head quickly and saw faint beams of light cutting through the trees on the far side of the river. Moving in a slow, steady pattern. "They're here," Ross muttered without another word. He helped Arya to her feet. They moved west along the frozen river, keeping low. Max trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to check the air before moving again. The lights behind them grew brighter. Voices carried across the ice soldiers speaking quickly into radios. "They close," Arya said, glancing back. "I know," Ross replied. He led them toward the steep riverbank where snow-covered roots jutted out. "Up here, the ice will give us away if they get too close." They climbed quickly, boots sinking into the snow. At the top, Ross pulled Arya behind a fallen log. The patrol lights swept across the river below, pausing now and then as if the soldiers sensed something. One beam of light lingered on their trail for a moment too long. Ross's heart thudded. "They see tracks," Arya whispered. Ross grabbed a branch and began sweeping snow over their footprints, working fast. "Keep moving," he said. "Max, go." The dog bounded ahead, leading them deeper into the woods. The forest was darker here, the moonlight broken by thick branches overhead. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Ross didn't slow down. Until they reached a cluster of boulders. They stopped to catch their breath. Arya leaned against the rock, her breathing ragged. "You could leave me. Safe for you." Ross shot her a sharp look. "Not happening." She blinked, surprised at the firmness in his voice. "Why you owe me?" "Nothing." Ross glanced at Max, who stood watching the path they'd just taken. "Maybe not. Osh. But you're carrying something that could save lives, maybe even end this war. I'm not walking away from that." Arya looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we keep going." They moved again, this time through narrow deer trails that wound between frozen streams. Every now and then, Ross stopped to listen, once for footsteps, once for the faint hum of a drone overhead. By the time they reached the base of a low ridge, the cold had sunk into their bones. Ross could see the silhouette of the old Cums Tower ahead, half hidden by snow-covered trees. Its antenna leaned at a dangerous angle, but the small control hut beneath it still stood. "We made it," Ross said, or so he thought. Max stopped dead at the edge of the clearing, growling softly. Ross followed his gaze and spotted movement. Near the hut, 3 shapes crouched low with weapons in their hands. He pulled Arya down behind the nearest tree. "Not soldiers," he whispered. "Too quiet. These are hunters." Her eyes widened. "Kovari, yeah," Ross said grimly. "Looks like you're wanted on both sides." The hunters moved like predators, scanning the clearing with strange, glowing visors. One of them knelt and ran clawed fingers through the snow, then pointed toward the direction Ross and Arya had come from. "They track us," Arya murmured. Ross's mind raced. If they tried to run, the hunters would hear them. If they stayed put, the humans would arrive from the other side soon. They were trapped between two enemies. Max's growl deepened, and Ross placed a hand on the dog's neck. "Not yet, boy," he whispered. He turned to Arya. "We're going to split their attention. I'll draw them away. You and Max get two. The hut. If the power works, send the data to my friend." Her brow furrowed. "No, we go together." "Not an option," Ross said firmly. "If they catch me, I can handle myself. If they catch you, this all ends." Arya's jaw tightened, but she finally nodded. Ross moved low and fast, circling around the clearing. He snapped a branch under his boot on purpose. One of the hunters jerked its head toward the sound and signaled the others as the hunters advanced toward him. Ross caught a glimpse of Arya and Max sprinting for the hut. The first shot rang out bright, green plasma cutting through the air. Ross dove behind a snowbank, heart pounding. He had no choice now but to keep their attention. If Arya didn't get that data sent in the next few minutes, everything they had risked so far would mean nothing. The green plasma blast sizzled past Ross's head, striking a tree and exploding into shards of burning bark. He ducked lower, snow spraying up as another shot tore through the night. "Come on, you ugly lizards," he muttered under his breath. "Keep looking at me." From the corner of his eye, he saw Arya and Max vanish into the control hut. Good. She was moving fast. Now he just had to stay alive long enough for her to finish. The hunters fanned out, moving with the patience of predators. They didn't rush him. They wanted him to make a mistake. One of them leaped onto a fallen log, aiming low. Ross fired a quick burst from his rifle, not to hit, but to force them to duck. "Let's see if you like this," he growled, pulling a small smoke grenade from his belt. He yanked the pin and rolled it across the snow. A hiss filled the air, and thick gray smoke spread over the clearing. The hunters hissed back in their guttural language, their visors glowing brighter as they tried to pierce the haze. Ross moved through the smoke in short bursts, never staying in one place long enough to be a target. His boots crunched softly over snow. The hunters were quick, but their weapons fired slower than his rifle. Inside the hut, Arya was breathing hard. She had found the main consultancy half frozen and flickering with weak power. Max paced behind her, ears twitching at every distant gunshot. She slid the metal disc into a slot, holding her breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen lit up with lines of alien code, shifting into human script. "Transmission ready. Destination required." Arya's fingers trembled over the old keyboard. She typed the coordinates Ross had whispered to her earlier. Outside, Ross ducked behind a tree as plasma blasts tore through the smoke. He was running low on ammo. He knew the humans could arrive any minute now, and if they saw him fighting alongside an alien's cause, there would be no explaining it. He fired again, clipping one hunter's shoulder. It screeched and tumbled into the snow. The others roared in their guttural tongue, and Ross smiled grimly. "Good. Stay mad at me inside." The console beeped. "Transmission in progress. 45% complete." Arya glanced at Max. "We not have much time," she whispered. Max growled, staring at the door. Arya froze. She could hear footsteps outside the hut. Heavy, deliberate. Not Ross's. The door burst open and one of the hunters stepped inside, weapon raised. Max launched forward without hesitation, his teeth sinking into the alien's arm. The plasma pistol fired wildly, scorching the wall. Arya grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and swung hard, catching the hunter in the side of the head. It stumbled back, roaring in pain. "Max, down!" she shouted. The dog released his grip, and the hunter staggered out into the snow. Arya turned back to the console transmission in progress. 82% complete. Her chest tightened. She could hear more voices outside now, not just the hunters. Human voices shouting. Ross heard them too. Over the sound of plasma and gunfire, a new noise cut through human boots pounding through snow. Rifles cocking? Great, he muttered. Just what I needed. He ducked back toward the hut, weaving between trees. The smoke was thinning, and the hunters had spotted him again. Green bolts of energy streaked past his legs. He fired a short burst, forcing them to scatter. When he reached the clearing, he saw the worst possible sight: 3 human soldiers approaching the hut from one side to hunters from the other. "Arya, finish it now," Ross shouted, running. Toward her dot inside, the console beeped. Transmission complete. Data secured. Arya yanked the disk out and stuffed it into her armor. The door slammed open, and Ross stumbled in, slamming the lock behind him. "We're leaving, now." She stood, ready to follow, but Max barked sharply once, twice, 3 times. Ross's instincts flared. "They've surrounded us," he said grimly. The walls shook as something heavy slammed into the side of the hut. Snow rained down from the roof. "We can't fight both sides," Ross muttered. He scanned the room quickly, spotting a hatch in the floor half buried under debris. He kicked it open, revealing a narrow crawl space leading into the frozen ground. He ordered. Arya dropped into the crawl space, Max right behind her. Ross followed, pulling the hatch shut just as the door above shattered. Boots stomped inside. Voices barked orders. The crawl space was dark and cramped, forcing them to move on hands and knees. Frost bit at Ross's fingers as they crawled toward the faint glow at the far end. They emerged into the icy night behind the hut. Hidden by a low ridge, the sounds of shouting and gunfire above them were muffled by snow and distance. Ross looked at Arya. "That data's out there now. No one can stop it from spreading." She nodded, a mix of relief and fear in her eyes. "Now they hunt harder." Ross glanced at Max, who was watching the tree line with unshakable focus. "Then we stay ahead of them." In the cold night, the 3 of them moved on, carrying not just proof of a conspiracy, but the weight of knowing they had just made themselves enemies to everyone. The wind bit hard against their faces as Ross, Arya, and Max pushed through the forest. The stars above were sharp points of light, but Ross barely noticed. Every sound, every snapping twig or distant thump made him tighten his grip on his rifle. Somewhere out there, both humans and Kovari hunters were searching for them. Now that the data had been sent, they weren't just fugitives, they were proof that the war's biggest secret was true. "We keep moving until sunrise," Ross said, glancing back at Arya. She nodded, pulling the coat tighter around herself. "Where we go?" "There's a cargo port in the next valley," Ross replied. "Freighter leaves at dawn. If we can get on it, we'll be gone before they close the net." Max trotted ahead, stopping now and then to sniff the air. His body language was tense, but confident he still had their trail under control. For hours they moved, slipping between shadows, avoiding open ground. Once, the low hum of a human patrol ship passed overhead. Another time, the faint green glow of Kovari tracking visors flickered far off in the trees. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the snow, they reached the ridge that overlooked the port. Below them, the freighter's engines rumbled softly, clouds of steam curling into the cold morning air. Cargo drones zipped back and forth, loading containers. Ross knelt, scanning the area. 2 guards at the gate. "We go through the supply lane, they won't check it as closely." Arya looked down at the port, her expression unreadable. "After this, what you do?" Ross gave a humorless smile. Haven't thought that far ahead. Staying alive, step 1. Max gave a low bark, drawing their attention to movement below. 2 armored figures, one human, one Kovari, were speaking near the freighter. Even from this distance, Ross could see they weren't arguing. They were cooperating. Arya's voice was bitter. See? They worked together in shadows. Ross's jaw clenched. Yeah, and now they know we've exposed them. They began their descent toward the supply lane. Snow crunched softly under their boots, but the noise was swallowed by the hum of machinery. For a moment, it felt like they might actually make it. Then Max stopped dead, ears up, eyes locked on the left. Ross followed his gaze and swore under his breath. A squad of human soldiers was moving up from the lower road, rifles ready, scanning the ridge. At the same time, 3 Kovari hunters appeared from the opposite side, their glowing visors cutting through the cold mist. They found us, Ross said. Arya's hand went to the small pouch where she had hidden the disc. I will run. You and Max, go other way. Ross shook his head firmly. Not happening. We finish this together. The soldiers spotted them first, shouts echoing in the cold air. The hunters moved faster, trying to cut them off. Run, Ross barked. They sprinted down the slope, Max bounding ahead. Plasma blasts and rifle fire tore through the snow around them. Ross returned fire, forcing the closest soldier to dive for cover. Arya moved with surprising speed despite her injuries. Keeping low, they reached the side of the freighter just as the loading ramp began to retract. A cargo drone floated nearby, its side panel open. Ross shoved Arya toward it. Inside. She climbed in, Max right behind her. Ross jumped last, pulling the panel closed just as a plasma bolt slammed into the metal. Inside the drone's dark compartment, they huddled together, listening as it lifted into the air. Through the thin walls, Ross could hear shouting, boots running, engines roaring. Minutes later, the drone docked inside the freighter. The sound of locking clamps echoed. Then the low hum of the main engines deepened. The freighter was taking off. Ross exhaled slowly. We made it. But Arya didn't relax. She pulled the disc from her pouch and held it out to him. Now, Galaxy knows truth, but truth is dangerous. Ross took it, feeling its weight in his hand. Dangerous to the people who built this war, good for everyone else. She met his eyes. Then we keep moving. Never stay too long. Never trust too easy. Ross nodded. He looked down at Max, who had already curled up at their feet, eyes half closed but still alert. He's good at that, Ross said with a faint smile. The freighter's engines roared louder, carrying them higher into the sky. Far below, the soldiers and hunters would still be searching, still trying to erase what had happened tonight. But it was too late. The truth was already out. For Ross, it wasn't just about saving Arya anymore. It was about fighting for something real, something worth all the risk. And as long as they kept moving, they still had a chance. Somewhere deep in the freighter's hold, Max gave a single soft bark, as if agreeing. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Ross felt like they were finally fighting the right one.